Over a year of engagement with public authorities in Northern Ireland, we have identified and raised a range of concerns about potentially discriminatory practices arising from the Northern Ireland Executive's current approach to tackling domestic and sexual abuse. In terms of red flags, or if you will red lights, indicating barriers to pathways to protection for male victims, we have identified intersecting issues across at least 10 different areas of public policy. These include child protection, housing, provision of services, employment, statutory funding and procurement, partnership working, information and signposting, legislative reform, public policy development and design, and compliance with public sector equality duties. We have already raised most of these red flags with the relevant authorities. I will now discuss them in the context of recommendations for positive action that we believe will best assist public authorities to comply with their statutory duties under equality and human rights law. We recommend that when seeking to drive positive change and open up pathways to protection for all, the relevant public bodies should adopt a gender-sensitive strategic approach. Over recent years, the Northern Ireland Executive have clearly shifted gears towards publicly adopting more gender-specific and gender-sensitive strategic approaches to addressing the needs of female victims. This can be evidenced by the development of a specific strategy to end violence against women and girls. By comparison, our assessment is that the Executive are still very much stuck in gender neutral when it comes to addressing the needs of men and boys. Adverse impacts arising from this two-tier approach will be further compounded by evidence indicating that aspects of the multi-agency strategy to tackle domestic and sexual abuse are gender neutral in name only, and in reality at least some outputs are better suited to or even biased toward female service users. The existence of these significant and stark obvious gaps in public services has been well understood for at least a decade. They are effectively a direct outcome of the gender budgeting approach adopted by the relevant departments and public authorities responsible for the delivery of previous domestic abuse strategies. This approach has led to a disparity between funding for male and female specific services of at minimum £10 million per year. The Equality Impact Assessment of the new draft strategy does not acknowledge this and fails to identify any adverse impacts on men or women arising from the proposed approach. State party signatories to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights are committed to recognise that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. These rights are enshrined in UK law by the Human Rights Act 1998, and all citizens are entitled to these rights without discrimination. Gender-specific and/or gender-sensitive actions are permitted under human rights equality law, provided they are reasonable, proportionate, balanced, and do not create detriments to other protected groups. The Northern Ireland Human Rights and Equality Commissions have both recommended that the Executive reconsider their gender-neutral approach and also advise that the strategy should include specialised, gender-sensitive, accessible support and actions for all victims. We believe that the best way to achieve this is by the development of two interconnecting strategies or action plans that aim to tackle intimate violence against women and girls and boys and men respectively. A consistent frustration that we encountered during our engagement with government departments involved establishing responsibility for the issues raised. Lines of vicarious responsibility become even less transparent when arm's-length bodies and third-party service providers are also involved. When we approached the Department of Communities and the Northern Ireland Housing Executive with concerns that sanctuary support services funded by them turn children away solely on the basis of their sex, it took 6 months before either were in a position to indicate that, as far as they are aware, this practice does not occur. Even then, this came with a caveat that access criteria for such services fall outside of their remit. Split the Difference have asked Northern Ireland Women's Aid Federation to confirm that children are not turned away from any of their refuges. To date, we have received no response to our request. We recommend that the Northern Ireland Executive should address credibility issues with Section 75 compliance. The capitulation of responsibility and remit for access criteria for public services can also be seen to circumvent responsibility to address adverse impacts arising from discriminatory and sex segregation practices. For example, despite obvious gaps in services provided to male victims by the Northern Ireland Housing Executive, an equality impact assessment of their homeless strategy found that there were no adverse impacts for men or women arising from their approach. The assessment is based on the following logic. The strategy specifically addresses homelessness where it is directly associated with gender. Each case will be assessed individually, however we will draw on a range of services that may be able to offer advice or support associated with gender. Examples include, but are not limited to, Women's Aid, Men's Advisory Project and the Rainbow Project. We believe that such a perspective is extremely problematic in terms of both the spirit and letter of human rights and equality law, as the Housing Executive should understand that their policy of drawing on services associated with gender currently creates a highly significant adverse impact for their individual male service users. Furthermore, if providers in an open housing service market are genuinely unable to address obvious gaps in services for male victims, we believe that the Housing Executive should take steps to address this adverse impact by developing and delivering such services in-house, as they do in the case of some homeless hostels. The Executive Office have still not published any equality screening or equality impact assessment outcomes. After the Executive committed to a violence against women and girls strategy, violence against women and girls strategies in other regions have been shown to contribute to a marginalisation and invisibilisation of male victims, and there remains considerable confusion about how the Executive's proposed gender-specific and gender-neutral strategies will align. We applaud and support positive actions to prevent violence against women and girls. The absence of aligned positive actions for male victims may create significant detriments and chill factors for them. A credible equality impact assessment should identify any adverse impacts and assist the relevant departments to mitigate against them. Public authorities can be seen to be extremely reliant on services delivered by strategic partners who openly discriminate against service users solely on the grounds of their sex. We are concerned that sufficient steps have not been taken to address the adverse impacts arising from this reality. We are also concerned that some discriminatory practices may have become embedded and normalised in areas of public service provision. Nine of the largest domestic abuse service providers in Northern Ireland are exclusively female-led. 80% of health and social care sector and 75% of NGO sector employees are female. We also note that the majority of senior public servants and arm's-length commissioners that we have engaged with are also female, as were all members of the Department Community's Gender Equality Expert Advisory Panel. Women can be powerful allies and advocates to victims of abuse. Nevertheless, we encourage public authorities to guard against conscious, unconscious and gamma bias given to the significant underrepresentation of men in positions of power, control and responsibility in this area of public policy. provide a greater focus on the importance of training on the needs and experiences of male victims in order to combat the sort of persistent myths, stereotypes and victim blaming we encountered and documented in our report. Also ensure accurate knowledge and awareness of the law and good practice among policymakers, employers and service providers. The Executive Office appear to understand that the proposed two-strand approach will be perceived by some as a political signal to public authorities, service providers, victims and the general public alike that male victims of crime are less important. We ask all politicians, public authorities and domestic abuse providers to consciously commit to equitable best practice standards of working and to promote clear and unambiguous messaging that they are committed to protecting the human rights of all victims. In partnership with Men's Alliance Northern Ireland, Split the Difference have developed the Be Seen, Heard and Safe Promise to assist them to promote inclusive messaging and a commitment to undertake a number of simple best practice steps to promote equality and combat discrimination. We thank and commend Naomi Long, MLA and leader of the Alliance Party, for being the first to commit her party to this promise. We also thank and commend her for her proactive work and commitment to the needs of all abuse victims and for her leadership in this complex, emotive, political and occasionally contentious area of public policy.
We at Alliance promise to help make everyone safe from abuse. We promise to ensure that anyone at risk of or experiencing abuse will be seen and heard by us. Domestic and sexual abuse are serious crimes and can happen to anyone, irrespective of age, race, disability, ethnicity, religion, gender identity or sexual orientation. It's important that people report those abuses and it's important that we respond.
We encourage all political parties, politicians, public authorities, domestic abuse service providers and trade unions to follow her example and make the Be Seen, Heard and Safe promise. We ask that the relevant departments and the 5 regional health and social care trusts ensure all domestic and sexual violence partnership working arrangements are fit for purpose and that all healthcare professionals adopt an informed and equitable approach to addressing the needs of male victims. In our report, we highlight examples concerning practices relevant to 3 of the 5 regional partnership jurisdictions. For example, the Department of Communities have invested over 0.5 million of public monies into the construction and running costs of the recently opened Foyle Family Justice Centre. The purpose of the centre is described as a wraparound support service to victims of domestic violence. The Foyle Family Justice Centre is managed by Foyle Women's Aid, who self-identify as a women-only organisation. Split the Difference have contacted them to confirm the centre's services will be provided on an equitable basis with no access restrictions for men. To date, we have received no response to our correspondence. We encourage public authorities to work and support male victims, their families and advocates to raise awareness of their needs and contribute to relevant public policy, conversation and consultations. A major outcome of Split the Difference's engagement in Northern Ireland has been the co-founding of the Northern Ireland Men's Federation in partnership with Men's Alliance. The purpose of this federation would be to connect, support and represent organisations, professionals and academics committed to working collectively and collaboratively to bring about positive change for men and their families. We would encourage the Department of Justice and Health to meet with the federation members to discuss their draft strategy. And finally, we are concerned about the apparent lack of proactive regard or advocacy for male victims communicated by and to gatekeepers in civil society and watchdogs such as the Equality and Human Rights Commissions. To some extent, This appears to be informed by a lack of awareness and understanding of the needs of male victims arising from the relative absence of advocacy for them. Incredibly, the Northern Ireland Commission has advised us that no one has ever previously raised any of the numerous issues that we have now brought to their attention. We are especially concerned by perspectives provided to us by the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission, including the view that actions taken by the executive to address abuse experienced by women and girls have no relevancy in the context of considering action or inaction by them to address abuse experienced by boys and men. Such a perspective appears to be relatively unique in the discipline of equality and human rights considerations, not least given that it is widely understood that Northern Ireland equality law generally and the Article 14 of the Human Rights Act specifically are informed by the concept of comparison of treatment and, indeed, a comparator is required to evidence breaches of these laws. The Commission has also not responded to our request that they seek urgent clarification from the UK Government on their assessment of the Istanbul Convention's compatibility with the Human Rights Act 1998. In 2022, the UK Government ratified the Istanbul Convention, which has significantly informed the Home Office's highly gendered violence against women and girls strategy. State parties are legally required to report to the European Commission on actions taken to protect and support female victims of violence only. The Convention gives an important political signal with regard to the status of victims, and at least to some extent ratification establishes a hierarchy of victims in UK law. Boys and men do not fall within the scope of protection afforded by the Convention. State parties are encouraged to apply its provisions to all victims of domestic violence, including men, children and the elderly. However, Parliament do not do so when ratifying the treaty into UK law.